What if Japan won World War II? The street signs are in kanji, Mount Fuji's on the dollar, and American schools now open with a pledge to the empire. In this version of history, the Axis powers didn't just win, they rewrote what victory looks like on the West Coast. Imagine waking up in Los Angeles, where sushi bars outnumber burger joints and the Hollywood sign's been replaced with a giant torii gate. Japanese naval fleets patrol the coast, and the sound of taiko drums echoes through the streets. This is not just an alternate history, but a world that's been remade in Japan's image. Let's consider a different outcome. What actually happened during Japan's military expansion in the Pacific during World War II? Japan's military expansion began in the early 1930s with its invasion of Manchuria. By 1941, Japan had occupied large parts of China and launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, bringing the US into the war. The Japanese military continued to advance, capturing key territories such as Singapore, the Philippines, and Indonesia, and reached the borders of India and Australia. However, the tide of the war began to turn in favor of the Allies in 1942 with the Battle of Midway, where the Japanese Navy was severely weakened. The US then launched a series of island-hopping campaigns, gradually pushing the Japanese back, while the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and invaded Manchuria. In August 1945, the US dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, leading to Japan's eventual surrender on August 15, 1945. The Japanese occupation and war crimes were then addressed by the Allied powers, and Japan was occupied and reformed under the watch of the US from 1945 to 1952. Now, let's ask the big what-ifs. What if Japan's military expansion hadn't been slowed down by the Battle of Midway? What if the US hadn't been able to assemble enough forces to launch those island-hopping campaigns? Could Japan have successfully defended its vast territories in China and Southeast Asia against the Allies? Would the Soviet Union have still declared war on Japan if they were winning? What if the atomic bombs hadn't been ready in time or hadn't been dropped at all? Let's explore these turning points and see how they could have changed the course of history. Number 1. What if Japan's military expansion hadn't been slowed down by the Battle of Midway? Japan's war machine never lost its momentum, and the Pacific theater was overrun by an unstoppable force, with island after island, country after country falling under its control. A vast empire stretching from the shores of China to the borders of Australia, with the Philippines and Indonesia serving as key hubs for military operations and resource extraction, while the United States, unable to stem the tide, was forced to focus its defense on the western seaboard, and the world was forever altered as Japan imposed its unique blend of traditional and modern culture on its conquered territories. Number 2. What if the US hadn't been able to assemble enough forces to launch those island-hopping campaigns? In this world, Japan's relentless march across Asia has become the new normal, with the once mighty empire now stretching from the outskirts of India to the shores of Australia. The war-weary population of the United States is on its knees, still reeling from the devastating surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, and unable to muster a strong enough counterattack to dislodge the Japanese from their newly won territories. The Japanese military, emboldened by their string of victories, has imposed a harsh, imperial-style rule over their subjugated lands, with collaborators and informants keeping the local populations in line through a mixture of fear and propaganda. Life in the occupied territories is a daily struggle, with strict curfews, rationing, and forced labor camps a constant reminder of Japanese dominance. Number 3. Could Japan have successfully defended its vast territories in China and Southeast Asia against the Allies? Japan's reach stretches from the mountains of China to the islands of Indonesia, a vast, heavily fortified empire where the rising sun dips into the sea. Every city, every town, every village is an outpost of the Imperial Japanese Army, with soldiers marching in lockstep and civilians bowing to the occupation. The once thriving streets of Shanghai and Manila are now sleek and modern, bearing the unmistakable mark of Japanese design, a blend of ancient temples and neon-lit skyscrapers. China's rural countryside is dotted with fortified zones, each one a self-contained Japanese fiefdom, while Southeast Asia's ancient kingdoms are now mere vassal states, bound to the empire by oaths of fealty. Every aspect of life is dictated by the imperial army's tightly wound codes of discipline and duty, with conformity the only currency that matters. Number 4, would the Soviet Union have still declared war on Japan if they were winning? Soviet tanks never rolled into Manchuria, and the Red Star never flew over Japanese-occupied China, because in this world, Japan's military juggernaut never lost steam, and the Allies never gained the upper hand. The Soviet Union, keeping a wary eye on the German front, decided to prioritize its European campaign and maintain a cautious neutrality in the Far East, avoiding a costly two-front war. Without the Soviet declaration of war, Japan's northern borders remained secure, and its military focused on crushing the last pockets of resistance in Southeast Asia and the Pacific, solidifying its grip on the conquered territories. Number 5, what if the atomic bombs hadn't been ready in time, or hadn't been dropped at all? The Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere is the unchallenged dominant power, with Japan's military might and strategic brilliance having successfully repelled the Allies, forcing the United States to negotiate a humiliating surrender. Its Pacific territories and influence ceded to the Empire of Japan, which now stretches from the shores of Alaska to the jungles of Indonesia, its people living under a strict militarized regime, with dissent swiftly crushed, and the emperor worshipped as a living god, while the Western world is forced to relearn its place in the new global order, its culture and values slowly being eroded by the pervasive influence of the rising sun. The impact on the world. Looking at the world now, it's almost surreal to think about what could have been. Japan's victory would have meant a fundamentally different global landscape. The Pacific would be a Japanese-dominated sphere of influence, with the U.S. West Coast under occupation. The ripple effects would be felt everywhere, from the cultures that blend together to the politics that shape our lives. Imagine the United States, its identity forged in the fire of freedom and democracy, now living in the shadow of an imperial power. The idea of American exceptionalism would be turned on its head. The nation that prided itself on being a beacon of liberty would have to confront the reality of being a conquered people. But Japan's triumph would also mean a unique cultural synthesis. East would meet West in ways both beautiful and jarring. Traditional Japanese values would mingle with American innovation, creating a distinct Pacific identity. We'd see kimono-clad women walking alongside American-style diners and Buddhist temples standing next to Christian churches. However, this new world order would also be built on the back of unimaginable loss. The war would have claimed millions of lives, leaving behind a trail of grief and trauma. Families would be torn apart, communities shattered, and entire nations forever changed. And yet, in this altered reality, there's a haunting sense of possibility. A world where the Japanese Empire reigns supreme raises questions about the very nature of power and freedom. Would we be living in a more hierarchical society, with clear lines of authority and tradition? Or would we find new ways to resist, to push back against the status quo? As I look at this world, I'm left with a single piercing thought. What does it mean to be free when the circumstances of our lives are forever changed?